Olá, tudo bem? Bem-vindo ao meu programa semanal aqui no 247. Esta semana o assunto da reportagem que eu vou mostrar é Síria, que, de acordo com The Grey Zone e seus jornalistas Ben Norton, Max Blumenthal e Aaron Mati, pode estar chegando ao fim, por causa da decisão do Trump, por qualquer motivo que ele tinha, de começar a retirar as tropas. Agora, essa retiração de tropa na Síria está gerando maior polêmica nos Estados Unidos, principalmente na esquerda dos Estados Unidos, que de fato, vou falar a verdade, a esquerda nos Estados Unidos é muito mais fraca do que a esquerda no Brasil. A última vez que teve um presidente realmente da esquerda nos Estados Unidos foi Franklin Delano Roosevelt, na década de 1930, ou seja, quase 100 anos atrás. A esquerda tem alguns 28 deputados federais da corrente interna progressista do Partido Democrata, mas é fraco comparado com a esquerda brasileira, e é fraca porque o capital sempre vem tentando fragmentar a esquerda nos Estados Unidos e coloca as pessoas brigando uns contra outros. E tem uma briga enorme acontecendo agora por causa da Síria. Tem uma facção dentro da esquerda chamada vanguarda, ou esquerda mais esquerda de verdade, dizem eles, que fala que tipo assim, as tropas estadunidenses precisam continuar na Síria para proteger os curdos na área do Rojava, que é uma área onde tem algumas experiências interessantes com governança socialista local, ou seja, eles governam através de um sistema de conselhos populares bem parecido com o que o PT fez nas cidades como Porto Alegre na década de 1990, ou que Hermínia Maricato chama o modelo de ciclo virtuoso de governar, né, com o aprofundamento democrático. Tem isso acontecendo no Rojava. E tem algumas pessoas da esquerda dos Estados Unidos que dizem, não, os Estados Unidos, o militar, por isso fica lá para proteger a esquerda vanguarda. Mas tem um monte de pessoas da esquerda anti-imperialista dos Estados Unidos que fala que isso é bobagem. E tem razões porque isso é bobagem, principalmente porque os turcos são alinhados com os Estados Unidos dentro da OTAN. Eles estão entrando na Síria agora por causa do convite do governo dos Estados Unidos, e que ano passado eles entrou pelo norte da Síria, matou um monte de curdos e exilou mais 120 mil curdos, e os Estados Unidos, que estava lá na época, a força militar não fez nada para proteger os curdos. Né? Então, as pessoas que arguem que precisam manter presença para proteger os curdos no Rojava estão sendo acusados de ser apologistas para uma guerra sangrenta, imperialista, de procuração dos Estados Unidos, que já matou 500 mil pessoas, já exilou 5,6 milhões de pessoas da Síria, né? E está ficando feia, porque eu tenho o Brasilwire, nossa publicação de notícias sobre o Brasil em inglês, nós temos amigos em diferentes entidades da mídia que estão nos dois lados dessa questão. Mas eu vou mostrar uma reportagem, uma conversa do Ben Norton e Aaron Mati do The Grey Zone, exatamente para mostrar onde meus sentimentos ficam. Eu, pessoalmente, sou contra qualquer ação imperialista dos militares estadunidenses. Eu não vou manifestar a favor da continuação de tropas estadunidenses em qualquer país nunca, entendeu? A coisa é feia, mas a reportagem é interessante porque eles falam que eles acham que pode representar o fim da guerra. Porque o que aconteceu? Depois da mídia manifesta muita preocupação com o caso dos curdos no norte da Síria, eles entraram na aliança com Assad e com os russos. Ou seja, a crise já está chegando ao seu fim. Os turcos não querem brigar com os russos, né? E se Trump cumprir a promessa dele, que é duvidoso, né? Vamos torcer que ele cumpriu a promessa, os tropas vão ser totalmente retirados da Síria. O governo pluralista do Assad vai conseguir recontrolar o país inteiro e vai ser o fim dessa tragédia. Eu acho que o Brasil tem alguns vínculos fortes com a Síria e que todo mundo está torcendo que essa guerra acaba. Por causa disso que eu vou mostrar a reportagem, eu também vou mostrar porque eu acho interessante, pois o Grayson agora está copiando o modelo do 247. Essa é a primeira live que eles fez. Eles teve alguns problemas técnicos com a live, mas ele está seguindo a liderança do 247, porque não é fácil ganhar 450 mil seguidores no YouTube ou 1 milhão no Facebook, quando você tem um site da esquerda, né? Então, eu espero que vocês gostem disso, né? E um abraço para todos e todas de vocês. Obrigado por assistir e até a próxima semana.
This is a really historic weekend that we just had with, so Trump announces this abrupt pullout of U.S. forces after he basically green lights a Turkish invasion. Then we have the Kurds reaching a deal with the Assad government in a bid to basically repel the Turkish invasion. A huge turning point in the proxy war that you've been covering very closely for many years. Just your overall impression of what we've just witnessed in these last couple of days.
Yeah, I'll say that this is a very important moment right now in the war on Syria. It's looking more and more actually like the war could end sometime in the near future, which is of course something good. And I think what's really wild about this moment is that as awful as Trump is in so many ways, Trump is actually, I think, committed to withdrawing U.S. troops from Syria, which, as many of us have been saying, it was actually the presence of the U.S. troops and the U.S. military occupation that was preventing the end of this war. And why do we know that? Because we know that the U.S. government was in fact preventing the Kurdish-led forces, the YPG and SDF. The U.S. was pressuring them and preventing them from reconciling with the Syrian government. But what we saw yesterday on Sunday, that is October 13th, we saw that the Syrian army and the YPG SDF formed an agreement to allow the Syrian army to come into northern areas of Syria. And here we have a map here of the areas of Syria where the Syrian army came in, and the agreement says that the Syrian army is now going to be coming into Manbij and Kobani. And this is also an area where Turkey, from the north, Turkey has invaded and is attacking these areas. So I think we're seeing a really important historic moment in this war. I think that as soon as the YPG and SDF and the Syrian army, as soon as they're able to reconcile, it actually could be one of the final stages to ending this war. And I think, there are a lot of people on the left who are portraying this as something very bad and saying that Trump is, he's making America's image look bad in the world. But as awful as Trump is, the war might actually be coming to an end.
Well, okay, so anybody on the genuine left doesn't care about that. Like, it doesn't care about American credibility, which is, like the catchword. But there is a lot of concern for the plight of the Kurds. Huge amount of sympathy and solidarity with Rojava, where there has been this, this experiment in self-determination and of giving rights to everybody, and a society that people, naturally want to emulate because it sort of values egalitarianism and all these great things. What happens to the Kurds and to the social experiment that they've constructed inside of Syria?
Well, some people were pointing out in the live stream some really important points. Well, one, the NSA is clearly sabotaging us. No, but aside from that, Mr. A pointed out American troops are staying in Syria. Trump has not said anything about withdrawing troops from Syria. That was true until 2 days ago. And what's really interesting about it is that yesterday morning, today is the 14th, so on the 13th in the morning, you're right that at the beginning, there were a lot of misleading reports at first claiming that Trump was withdrawing the troops. There are at least 1,000 troops that have been acknowledged by the New York Times. They're illegally occupying Syrian sovereign territory. They're under violation of international law. And they happen to be in the area where the majority of Syria's oil is. What a coincidence, right? And also this is a major breadbasket region where there's a lot of wheat production in Syria. And the U.S. has been holding this essentially hostage, preventing the Kurdish-led forces from selling that oil to Damascus. But we'll see if it actually happens. But yesterday, Trump actually did order a withdrawal. At first, Trump had ordered the troops to move, and there were around 50 to 100 troops that were on the northern border. And I'll go back to this map here. There were troops on the northern border with Turkey. And originally, Trump simply ordered to move those troops. But now, allegedly, the U.S. is going to be withdrawing all of those troops from Syria. We'll see what happens. Now, to answer your question, what's interesting is that, there's been this narrative in the corporate media for years. In fact, I was just watching a CBC report, and they referred to the Kurdish-led groups, which are known as the YPG or the SDF, the People's Protection Units, the Syrian Democratic Forces. They're basically the same thing. They're a little different, but there were reports saying that they were enemies, but actually that's not true. The YPG and the Syrian army have not really fought, and if there have been skirmishes, they've mostly been accidental. For the past 8 years, they have not been fighting each other. In fact, both of them have been fighting some of the so-called rebel groups backed by Turkey, backed by the US, CIA, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. And now we have seen a reconciliation, which is very important. Here, I'm going to cut here. There's a really good reporter, Janan Musa, who's been reporting on the situation in Syria, inside Syria, and partially in Arabic, but also in English. And you can see here on our live stream, Janan Musa, very good reporter. And she posted some of these tweets here, celebrations in the Kurdish majority areas in northeastern Syria. People are celebrating the start of the deployment of the Syrian army to confront Turkish aggression. And then she shows images from Syrian TV entering Tamar and other areas in Hasaka. And if you look back at the map here, Hasaka's right up here in the northeast. So there's been reports of deployment of the Syrian army in multiple areas, not just in Kobani and Manbij, which are major areas where the YPG SDF fought ISIS, and now the Syrian army is coming back in, but also reports in Al-Hasaka as well. And Janan Musa also said, I've interviewed a dozen Kurdish officials in northern Syria. I'm not saying that this is an official poll, but it's significant. They all said they prefer the Syrian army to the Turkish army. Nobody I spoke to has plans to leave once the Syrian army arrives. So, there's this really hyperbolic reporting in corporate media. This is the end of the world, but in many ways, this is actually a much more peaceful solution than a permanent presence of U.S. troops occupying Syria's oil-rich region.
Well, I think that's a point to stress, right? So without knowing, the full context and just looking at the Kurdish situation in a vacuum, sure, I mean, what they've done there is amazing, but I guess it's important to at least recognize that it required the presence and the protection of U.S. forces, allowing all these bases in their territory. And the impact of that, for Kurds, it did allow them freedoms that they probably did not enjoy before, and self-determination that they didn't have before, but it still requires a occupying U.S. force inside a country, with the consequence of the rest of the country not being able to benefit from having a cohesive territory. And, as you talk about, the bulk of the oil reserves and a huge source of food being in that territory. So when we talk about the impact of this, do you think it's important to also stress that there's a whole other part of a country where most Syrians live that is also impacted by this, and they should be in the conversation as well?
Well, of course, absolutely, and it's really important that you're mentioning that. I'm glad. Some people in the comments have been pointing out sanctions. This is something you'll never hear in mainstream corporate media. In fact, right now with Max Blumenthal, who just got back from Syria, investigating on the ground the effects of sanctions, there are very crippling U.S. and European Union sanctions on Syria that are hurting the entire civilian population. And what's so wild is if you look at corporate media reports, I'm going to get up a report here, there has been a major lack of oil in the country because once again, Syria's oil-rich regions in the northeast have been militarily occupied illegally by the U.S., and also because U.S. and EU sanctions on Iran have prevented Syria from importing oil from a major ally, Iran. So this is what the corporate media says. Syrian fuel shortage squeezes Assad's loyalist. Now, of course, what they don't mention in this is when they say Assad loyalist, this is how sociopathic they are. They're referring to millions of people who live in government-held territory, and they're basically bragging about this. Syria is experiencing a worsening fuel shortage as a result of Western sanctions. Major cities have been brought to a near standstill, coming some of the worst economic circumstances for Assad's loyalists. Now, this is really a kind of sociopathic worldview, because what they're saying is that all of the millions of Syrian civilians who live in Syria under government-held territory, which is at this point the vast majority of the country, that these people are all puppets. They're all Assad loyalists. It would be like referring to people living in the U.S. as Trump loyalists.
Yeah.
And then gloating over the fact that they can't get access to oil and gas because of the U.S. military occupation in the Northeast and the sanctions, and also they can't import oil from one of their major neighbors, Iran, that has traditionally been an ally that has sent oil to them. So this is an important development to now reincorporate Northeast Syria into the rest of the Syrian state, so other Syrians can actually have a normal life. This is not about Assad. There's this obsession with making everything about Assad. This is about the fact that now the war is finally going to come closer to an end. And I think that's something that, especially people who claim to be on the left, that's something that we should be encouraging. Lenny Lobstar, who points out Turkey supports ISIS, the Kurds fight ISIS. This is true, and this is something let's talk about really quickly. Now, this is another irony of the war in Syria. Now, what's so funny is that for years, Turkey was supporting ISIS, and there was this obvious relationship there where there was something called the Jihadi Highway. Here, I'll cut back to our special effects here, our map. This northern border here, the border with Turkey, there are areas here, especially around, so you can see this green here are the so-called rebel-held areas, and Turkey is, in fact, militarily occupying this area as well. Turkey ethnically cleansed this area, Afrin, and this area, Idlib, is under the control, basically, almost entirely, of Al-Qaeda's rebranded affiliate, which is the largest Al-Qaeda affiliate since 9/11. And Turkey has been basically working on and off with the Al-Qaeda rebranded affiliate. Sometimes, they're fighting. Sometimes, in some cases, HTS, which is the name of the rebranded Al-Qaeda affiliate. At some points, there were videos posted on social media of the Turkish army working with HTS, rebranded Al-Qaeda, going through Idlib, or at least this northern area on the border with Turkey. But what's interesting is that this whole area for a while was referred to as the Jihadi Highway, because Turkey was allowing thousands and thousands of extremist Takfiri Salafi jihadists from around the world, from Chechnya, from Xinjiang in China, from Tunisia, from Saudi Arabia, and they were coming to Turkey, and there was a porous border, and they were simply allowed to come in here and, as this person pointed out, fighting Kurdish-led forces and ethnically cleansing and attacking Kurdish civilians in many of these communities, especially Kobani, taking over these areas over here, Al-Bab, Jarablus, Afrin. So this is the irony, is that this NATO ally, right? We always hear Turkey is our NATO ally. For years, the U.S. was fine with this.
Yeah.
And you can actually find online, I would recommend, Joe Biden spilled the beans a few years ago. Joe Biden gave a speech at Harvard University, and in the Q&A session, he was asked about the relationship of U.S. allies and ISIS, and he admitted that Turkey and Qatar and Saudi Arabia were supporting ISIS for years, and the U.S. knew that. We also, we have a very important 2014 email from Hillary Clinton acknowledging that Saudi Arabia and Qatar were supporting ISIS. So this was an open secret.
Let me read the Biden quote, because it's so important. So this is Joe Biden speaking in public at a event at Harvard, right? And he says, "Our biggest problem was our allies. Our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. The Turks, who are great friends and have a great relationship with Erdogan, who I've just spent a lot of time with, the Saudis, the Emiratis, etc. What were they doing? They were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war. What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and tens of thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad, except that the people who were being supplied were al-Nusra and al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts of the world."
So this is Biden speaking at Harvard's Kennedy School. Harvard's Kennedy School is very far from, obviously, some kind of anti-imperialist beacon. This is actually where Harvard trains people to be diplomats and politicians. And what's funny about that quote, I had that quote up a moment ago. The one thing about the quote is he accidentally said Emiratis. He meant Qataris. Mm-hmm. And he later apologized to the Emiratis. But
the thing is, he apologized to everybody.
Oh yeah.
He went on a tour. This quote was obviously controversial, and it sparked a lot of questions, to say the least. So Biden, to temper down the anger from his allies, the same ones he was calling out, he went on a personal apology tour to basically all these places to apologize and to take back that brief moment of honesty, which is just amazing. What he articulates there, it's what basically people like you, Ben, and Rania Khalek and Max have been saying for years, and you see the pushback you guys get when you point it out. When Joe Biden says it, he can't. Even the vice president can't stand by it. He has to go do an apology to the U.S. allies that the U.S. was working with to fuel this proxy war.
Yeah, and I was going to say, this isn't the only piece of evidence. There's another article I wrote originally at Salon. It's up at Gray Zone 2 from 2016. And this was when, so many in the Democratic Party, the DNC establishment, were freaking out over the WikiLeaks leak of Podesta emails. But one of those emails from 2014 is a leaked intelligence assessment. And you can see here, it proves that the U.S. knew Saudi Arabia and Qatar were supporting ISIS. Here is I have the excerpt from the actual email. And keep in mind, this is a 2014 email that is citing U.S. and Western intelligence services, right? Sources. And the WikiLeaks email from Podesta's email box from Hillary Clinton says, "We need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are providing clandestine financial and logistical support to ISIL and other radical Sunni groups in the region." So the U.S. knew this. They knew Turkey was doing it. And what's so interesting to see now is that some of the same people who not only were supporting these Salafi jihadi so-called rebels, they actually embedded with these rebels. And now that they're so openly attacking Kurdish civilians, trying to ethnically cleanse this area, while embedded within the Turkish army, all they did is change their uniforms and maybe cut their beard. And now so many people, like Danny Gold and many of these other pundits, who once were, again, embedded with these rebels, they're now trying to basically rewrite the record.
They also, the FSA also helped Turkey attack Kurdish civilians in Afrin, but that didn't engender the same kind of outcry as it's doing now. I guess because it was quieter. It was done. It was just done for whatever reason. It didn't get as much attention as this operation is getting now. But we have a couple of questions, Ben, that I want to get to because people are putting them in. So, Osama Qasim says, "You guys have correctly pointed out that the Turkish-backed FSA are jihadists, to the dismay of people like Max Boot." Max Boot is the neocon pundit who writes for the Washington Post, supported the Iraq War, the war in Libya, you name it,
and is now portrayed as the resistance because he's a never Trump Republican.
Are people starting to see their true colors? So are people starting to see the true colors of groups like the FSA? And the second part of this question has to do with Idlib, the last remaining province of Syria under the control of insurgents, controlled basically by an Al-Qaeda affiliate. And will Syria be able to retake Idlib?
Those are great questions. The first I'll say is, yeah, I think people are seeing their true colors. And this is the irony. I was just going to point out that you look at some of these journalists, right? Our friend Alex Rubinstein pointed out on Twitter, a great tweet here, that this guy, Danny Gold, who used to work at Vice and at Moderate Rebels, the show I have with Max Blumenthal, we've talked about how Vice kind of merged with the Obama administration, began pushing a lot of pro-war propaganda on Ukraine, Venezuela, and Syria. Danny Gold used to work with Vice, and he was embedded with some of these Takfiri rebels. And he said, he wrote this yesterday, right? So this is on Sunday, October 13th. "Opened up Facebook to see a fighter I had embedded with in 2013 is active in one of the Turkish-backed groups attacking northeast Syria right now. And he was originally in an so-called FSA group, referring to this Free Syrian Army. And ironically, he was fighting the YPG, the Kurdish-led fighters, in 2013. And then Danny Gold continues, "I lost touch with him years ago. It's strange to see the trajectory people have taken. He's lost friends to Nusra, ISIS, and the YPG. Sad to see him not participating." So we have someone who Oh, by the way, and then then Alex Rubinstein takes those tweets and then points. This is what his Danny Gold's report was for Vice. Chatting about Game of Thrones with Syria's most feared Islamic militants. I mean, it says everything. Like, so this is the guy who in 2013 was whitewashing hardline Takfiri Islamist extremists, and then now he's suddenly, oh yeah, it's so strange to see. And you can see, like, that's Jabhat al-Nusra. Yeah, Jabhat al-Nusra, I'm pretty sure. So, I mean, what's so crazy is seeing these people who were whitewashing the FSA now admitting, because it's so open, even U.S. government officials, and maybe you can talk about Brett McGurk. I mean, the FSA for years, there's actually a professor in Washington, D.C. named Mark Lynch. And I'll get up his quote in a second, but this is a mainstream scholar. He was not in any way, an anti-imperialist, anti-war activist, but even he acknowledged that the FSA never really existed as a unified entity. It was always a brand, this idea of the Free Syrian Army, and the CIA, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, Turkey were supporting these groups, Jordan, that didn't have a unified, coherent structure. They were simply warlords and different groups fighting around.